Thank you. All right, I'm going to go ahead and call this Assembly Rules Committee meeting, Committee of the Whole, to order. We're noticed today from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Let's go ahead and start with a roll call, please.
Felix Rivera. Felix Rivera.
Present.
John Weddleton. I'm not sure. Can anybody?
Okay, I'm back now. You were quiet for a bit, and I am Weddleton's here.
Thank you, John. Jamie Allard.
Here.
Christopher Constant. Forrest Dunbar.
Here.
Crystal Kennedy. Suzanne LaFrance.
Here.
Cameron Perez Verdia.
Here.
Pete Peterson.
Present.
Meg Zalatel.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thanks, Barbara. As usual, if folks want to get in the queue, please put yourself in the chat or text me if you can't access the chat. Also, as usual, for these committee meetings, for the Rules Committee meetings, I like to keep it relatively informal so that we could have robust dialogues. So feel free to use first names. And so let's go ahead and go through our agenda. So we're going to start with new business, report from the Assembly Chair, and then we'll go to a report from the Municipal Clerk. All right, so for my part, just a general comment to start. I want to give a huge thanks to the members for helping us get through the first part of our budget season. I know that we are all pretty darn exhausted over everything that's been happening. We only have 2 meetings left in the year, but possibly a lot of work left to do. I would ask that if any members are going to be bringing large, controversial, or complicated items forward in December, that they consult with Assembly leadership so we can coordinate an appropriate process to get this work done during the holiday season. Next, on the I Can't Breathe resolution, I've been doing regular reports on this. Happy to report that things are moving forward well for several of the commitments made in the resolution passed on June 2nd. Thanks for those who were able to attend the first racial equity dialogue yesterday. The clerk's office will be sending out the YouTube link for those who weren't able to attend, so invite folks to watch that. The second dialogue will be on December 16th, and members should have already received the required readings for that session. It's going to be that training is based off of reading and then come prepared, ready to discuss the reading. The third dialogue will be an all-day session sometime in January. I'll make sure to get a save the date out ASAP. Aside from the trainings, I've also been working with the clerk's office to move forward with 2 other commitments in the resolution, a community dialogues and what I've interpreted as racial equity assessments. So earlier this week, I met with the Alaska Black Caucus, who agreed to consider a partnership with the Assembly to organize and host dialogues with various communities of color. The clerk's office staff has also been doing some initial research on how different jurisdictions, both in the United States as well as across the pond, have been looking at racial equity assessments of policies that they consider. Next, Assembly office remodel. Not much of an update there. I'm waiting for bids to come back, and then once I get different bids back, we'll choose one of those bids to do the work, and things will get rolling with construction. I also understand that things are moving forward with the Chugiak Eagle River offices, with possible space secured, and staff is doing some of the exploratory work to make sure we're on track there. So I think we should. This is hopefully in early 2021. We're a little bit behind schedule, but hopefully not too far behind. So I'm getting notices that my internet is a bit splotchy. So if I am coming in and out, someone let me know and I'll switch over to my phone. Next is redo of assembly website. So once the ANITA contracts are approved, RDI will be able to begin their work. The working group that was formed on the assembly website should be mobilized again to work with RDI on this project. If the contracts get approved soon, we should be able to get this work done for the remodel of the assembly website, I guess you can call it, in early 2021. Next, public portal project. So as most are aware, a working group has been working with OIT to complete an assembly documents public portal project. This project's being led on the assembly side by Chris Constant. This project was put on hold as OIT shifted its resources to complete the close of the MLNP sale. Now that the sale is behind us, OIT has agreed to get back to work on the public portal project, and I look forward to seeing progress on this long anticipated need for both us and for members of the public who want to look at our documents. There's a couple other public participation projects I wanted to inform the body about. So there are 2 other projects in the works to help increase transparency and assist the public in engaging with the assembly. First is a video project that John Weddleton and the communications aide are spearheading, and it is essentially a, quote, how to engage with the assembly, quote, video presentation, which John has actually done with various groups in person over the years. So it's just translating that in-person presentation John has done to some type of video presentation. Second is an Assembly 101 packet, which the Communications Subcommittee is working on with our aides. And that's to help those who are new to engaging with the Assembly and walking through how we do our work and current resources available to the public to learn about our work and all of that. Basically, new who's coming in so that they can figure out what the heck the Assembly does and how we do what we do. Next, on homelessness communications. So earlier this week, I received the first work products from Northwest Strategies, who we've contracted with to do some homeless communications work. And so they've come up with the communications plan. I'll be meeting with a draft plan. I'll be meeting with Northwest Strategies next week to review this product and talk about next steps. And I understand that likely the January homelessness committee meeting will also be looking at some of this work products as well. Next, the audio loop in assembly chambers in the Wilda Marston. So as promised, I've been following up with Dean every week on this request. From my understanding, Dean is still waiting to get bids on this project, and it is something that we're going to look at for funding during the April first quarter budget revision process. So not as quick as we had hoped to get it done, but we at least have a timeline here for us to get the funding and get moving on the project. Last, I'm going to try to update the body if there's any policy changes to report on, any internal policy changes. There are no new policy changes to report. With that, is there anything else that members would like me to report on or any questions before I turn it over to Barbara? All right, not hearing anything, I'll turn it over to you, Barbara.
Thank you, Felix. My report is, I don't have a prepared report for you, so I'll field some questions, but I will tell you that personally, my cup runneth over. I feel like we have plenty of work to do in the clerk's office. We are letting the work flow through us, and we're getting done what we can get done. And we're very grateful again for Christy and Heather and Lily, the aides. I will tell you we had a great test this morning. We're continuing to try to test Teams Live, and for Meg, who participated in the test last week, this one was much better. And if you have any questions for me, I'll be happy to answer those. Oh, and I did want to say an early happy Thanksgiving to everybody.
Great, thanks, Barbara. And I guess just for a little bit of context, the Teams Live test that Barbara has been coordinating, those are to move us forward with having committee meetings in the chambers. So we're moving forward with it. I think we've run into a few technological snafus, but I think those have largely been addressed, I think, at this point. Cameron, you have a question?
Yeah, I guess I'd like to ask about video. It seems odd to me that we're even using Teams if we never use video, except for a presentation, that sort of thing. And it just changes the whole dynamic if we can't actually see each other and interact. And so I was told at one point that had something to do with bandwidth. But I just wanted to see if Barbara could address that. You know, I think many of us are on these meetings all day long with lots of people, and the assembly one is the only one that I don't have video on. So it's the strangest thing, because every other thing I'm on, I'm actually able to see other people. So anyway, I just wanted to see if that was a continuing issue, if that's something that that we can change, or where we're at with using video within Teams. Thanks.
Thanks, Cameron. Great question. The project that we're working on right now for Teams Live only involves committee meetings. And so because the Assembly has so many committee meetings, we're just trying to take this in bite-sized pieces. And I'd like to tell you that the Assembly has come light years since last March, because if you remember last March, you passed an emergency, well, actually you passed an ordinance that the Assembly could have less than a quorum.
I'm available. I'm just listening to something.
That you could have less than a quorum in person. So far we've moved from having to have a quorum in person to allowing more than a quorum to participate on the phone. We've added phones for the public to participate. You know, we've upgraded we've moved to the new on-base agenda system. And so we're moving as fast as we can, but, and we do have the video option in this project, but we haven't talked about bringing it into Assembly meetings. If it's successful, that can be our next discussion.
Okay, thanks. That's great. And I actually was thinking more of just like this meeting, or you know, work sessions and those kinds of things. Like the meeting we're on today, if everyone were to turn their video on, would it not work? I guess I'm wondering. I was originally told it was a bandwidth issue for meetings like this, and I guess I've been on a lot of Teams meetings and Zoom meetings with 50 people, 100 people, and there's never been a bandwidth issue. So I was just curious about actually our committee meetings and our work sessions to see why we continue to be off video.
The project is, I can't answer that question. I can tell you, Cameron, in my staff meetings, staff is required to have video on. And so that's a question for the Assembly. I think, you know, Desiree may be on this call and may be able to answer that, but I've never heard that before.
Yeah, Barbara, I got it. So Desiree, go ahead.
So you're correct, Cameron. When we first started doing all of these meetings, it was recommended by OIT to maybe have less people turn on their cameras, because it does tap into bandwidth, and just because the quality could lag and could affect people differently. I totally get and agree with how having images is so much nicer. And I think we started with no cameras, and maybe we could turn into having cameras on. I don't think it's a problem. And sometimes with these meetings, when you have 50, 100 some odd people attending, it can kind of clutter up and cause lags. But I think we can trust everybody enough now, since we've been doing virtual meetings for a fairly long time, to be able to understand whether they need to have their camera on or off for their own internet connectivity and all of that. So it started off as the recommendation, and it's just a trend that we've kept on with, but we could change depending on what you guys want to do.
Great, thanks.
Thanks, Desiree. Thanks, Barbara. Thanks, Carmen. Yeah, you bring up a good point, and yeah, I don't see any reason why we can't have videos on if that's something that folks want to do. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and move on, seeing no other questions, to assembly priorities. So just a couple of quick updates on the quarterly comprehensive update of our priorities. Northwest Strategies has delivered a design draft of the first comprehensive update. So I've asked for a meeting of the communications subcommittee to review this design draft. Over the holiday season, I'll also be reviewing the assembly priorities document and considering where we've come with it. A next iteration of the document, as we're getting pretty close to the end of the 2019-2021 time frame of the document. So yeah, looking forward to the communications subcommittee reviewing the draft design document at the end of the month. Okay, so that takes us pretty much to assembly member discussion on pending business and update from committee's upcoming business. So I'm just going to go down the line as I see it in the participants. So it's an alpha order, excuse me, starting with Jamie.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I don't have anything at this time. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Forrest.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chris, is Chris on this call now? I don't know if he was at the beginning. So Chris might want to talk about this, or Cameron, but we are continuing to work with the Native Village of Eklutna on the establishment of government-to-government relations, and we are hopeful to have some draft language, or perhaps even an ordinance introduced in December. It's not going to be, how do I describe it? We're working right now with legal to develop a first draft, and then the Native Village of Eklutna, of course, is going to go through their process on it. But we're hopeful, and that would, if you remember, the resolution we passed in December said we were starting a 1-year process of meetings, and we've had a lot of discussions with Native Village of Eklutna. I think the hope is that we'll have more process in December and January, but just flagging that for folks. And yeah, I'm really encouraged with what we have developed. I think it's something that will help improve the relationship and will help improve communication. And we've had strained relationships with the Native Village in the past that also contributed to some litigation. And I think that this process of having this formal relationship where we're in more close communication, I think should be helpful. Anyway, I think more people are going to want to take a look at that and take a crack at it and talk about it, but just flagging that as something that might be introduced in December, late December or early January, I would expect. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, I'm going to go a little bit out of order because Pete needs to go to him here soon, and I actually think he's been promoted or to president of AML. Congratulations, Pete. So go ahead.
Oh, well, thanks, Felix. Yeah, I've got a business meeting to conduct here in a few minutes, and I just wanted to mention that we're, because the meetings for the Ethics and Election Committee fall very close to holidays of Thanksgiving and Christmas, we've decided to try to move that meeting to the 9th of December. I have one meeting to cover both November and December, and so I wanted to give a heads up to the committee members, and hopefully we can get enough people to get a quorum on that day and conduct our business, the final business for the year.
Great.
And that's
Thanks,
pretty
Pete.
much it. Thank you.
So I'm also going to cut in line a little bit because Suzanne's going to be going to AML. So Suzanne.
Thanks, Felix. Just a couple things. Forrest and Chris and I are working with Dean on an amendment to the excise tax on tobacco products to specify that hemp retailers that are registered with the state of Alaska are exempt from the tax. And I did not know that the state of Alaska Department of Natural Resources Division of Agriculture actually has a registration program and regulates hemp products. So we're working on that. And then John and I are working also with legal on the omnibus AO concerning the COVID-19 response. And then as far as December's Health Policy Committee, Meg and I haven't had a chance to discuss. And so I don't know yet what's on the agenda for that. But thanks, Felix, and appreciate being able to go out of turn here.
Thanks. All right. Sorry, guys, I keep going out of turn because there's a lot of different conferences going on. So I'm going to go to Chris now, who's in between sessions at the National League of Cities. So go ahead, Chris.
All right. I don't actually have much of a report to offer right now, other than I've been sidling through the sessions that they've had. I did get to sit through a really nice conversation about the Cahoots program out of Washington and Oregon, which is essentially what we're developing for our mental health first aid program. So I'm getting some real world practice there. And I just got to sit through a 10-minute live discussion with President-elect Biden, which was very satisfying. And other than that, I actually have adopted a posture of slowing down the work while we're in this interim with less members and trying to just kind of make it through all of the things on our agenda. Otherwise, just continuing to watch the flow on our enterprise and utility work. And so that's all I have for prime time. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. All right, next I have Cameron.
I don't have much to report. Most of my time has been spent in constituent communication over the last couple of weeks. And Forrest already mentioned the work with Eklutna. So I think that's really all I have at this point. Thanks.
Thanks, Cameron. Next, I have John.
Hello. AMATs. We have the long range transportation plan coming to us not too long a time. I think it's hit Planning and Zoning Commission, and that's kind of the follow up on the MTP 2040 that we looked at. And the AMAT staff is starting on the MTP 2050, which I think we've talked about before. Meg and Chris and I have been working on something, the PEL, a type of study for the basically what we know as a highway to highway, and trying to push that a little closer, or so something happens a little bit sooner. We have the Midtown congestion relief is kind of taking precedence over that, but we've got a huge swath of buildings in Fairview that are basically stuck without knowing where that road may go. So we're working to get a process going that'll be much more clear on, where the road could go, so that people in that area will be able to invest or do whatever with their properties. And I think we had some progress on that. We had a work session and learned a lot. And I don't think the state is really opposed to it. It's just we're trying to get that timeline a lot faster. Community and Economic Development Committee, we're continuing to work on changes in the marijuana law. And that is, we've done quite a bit actually. So I think we'll probably have something maybe introduced last meeting in December, early January. And we're still working on shelter licensing and done a lot on that. We've got a ways to go. Then I think going through Planning and Zoning Commission right now is the look at allowing shelters in B3 and I think B2A or something they're looking at. And we'll see what they come up. That'll be the land use side, and we're looking at the licensing side. We also have, Suzanne had mentioned, and I hope we'll have something from Dean to at least glance at today, which I call the EOs to AOs. So putting the emergency ordinances into a normal ordinances, or emergency orders into a normal ordinance. Also working, and Meg's on it with me, incentives for sprinklers. You know, we kind of took those off the table when we did the building code. But as I learned about residential sprinklers, I think they're actually pretty cool. And if we can do it instead of saying you must have them, say, hey, if you put them in, you get these benefits. And it's much more complex than I thought going in, but really much more opportunity too. We're also, we had a couple resolutions regarding the railroad and its claims to exclusive use of its right of way, and challenge their stand that it is that they have that right. And I think it's very clear they don't, but they continue to act as if they do. And they have basically sued Arctic Crown Homeowners Association, which is the HOA that owns the airstrip at Ocean View, where the railroad also overlaps it. So the Arctic Crown is, you know, kind of the little guy fighting this huge corporation that also has federal backing for their lawsuits. So we've asked the legal team to Kate and others to look at the city joining that as an interested party, because we have very similar issues. I mean, right there in Ocean View, the railroad goes through a couple parks, and actually if you track the railroad through town, it overlaps significant amount of city parkland and other land. And so we are an interested party, and whether or not there's a benefit in us intervening or getting involved with that suit, or they're still deciding, and we have some time to do that. So those are some highlights. Lots of little stuff like everyone else. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Meg?
Sure, thanks. The items that John mentioned, I wanted to flag on the shelter licensing. Folks may be seeing that pop up at community councils. Planning is going around doing the public involvement piece on the Title 21 side of that. So if you see that popping up at community council, that's what they're doing. Then really the biggest thing I have coming up, and I'll be working with Forrest and Chris on this, is to put forward a resolution around the mobile crisis team or mental health first responders, so that we can put some policy parameters in place as they start to implement that program, and just work toward kind of what the getting out, I guess, what that vision is. There will be no Committee on Homelessness meeting in December. And in January, we're really going to be looking forward past the current anchored home and what's moving forward there. So if there are concerns or issues you particularly want addressed as it pertains to kind of what we've done over the past, let me know. I'll make sure the right people are in the room as we have that discussion. Other than that, nothing else terribly significant to report on for right now, I don't think. Thanks.
Thanks, Meg. For me, I am busy keeping up with all of the duties of the chair, and which you all heard part of some of the things that I'm doing, and just keeping up with constituent issues. So that is it from me. I don't think I'm going to be bringing up any legislation anytime soon. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to what I know several people are eagerly anticipating. So under other items, the first item we have is emergency declaration discussion, and using a Weddletonism, EOs to AOs. So just a little bit of an introduction before I turn it over to Dean and Dennis to do the presentation. Just for full transparency, no assembly members have seen this ordinance, so this is going to be our first chance to see it, unless John and Suzanne got a chance to look at it right before this committee meeting. For my part, this is in draft form. I think it's important to put that out there. So this is very much in draft, and I have stated, even though it's not my decision, but I have stated that I don't want this added onto the agenda until we're actually ready for prime time with it. So I don't suspect that this is going to get added onto the December 8th agenda. I suspect we'll keep working on it in draft form until it's ready. With that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Dean and Dennis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess I need to first mention that I think I had some misunderstanding this morning in the communications. I thought that Mr. Chair, you had said we're not adding this to the rules committee this morning. So I informed Mr. Wheeler he didn't need to attend. So he's not here. So I will fly this solo, and we have not distributed the draft, as I understand it, for the rules committee, correct?
I don't know. So Barbara, was it emailed to everyone yet?
I'm sorry, Felix, I was multitasking. Could you please repeat the question?
Sure. Has the draft ordinance been emailed out to everyone?
I do not know about that. Was it emailed to me to do that?
Yes. I believe Dean did. Yeah.
At 11:28. So no, I haven't done that yet.
Okay, if you get email out that to everyone, that'd be great. Thank you.
I guess what we could do at this point is I could pull it up on screen and sort of walk through, but that means this draft would be needs to be added to the work session page as a public document and distributed, now, I guess. Well, I guess it was just emailed, so let me pull it up here. I apologize for the confusion. I think that sometimes we say we won't have this on the agenda. We're not sure if we're talking about the rules committee agenda or the assembly meeting agenda. So I guess that's where I think I perhaps dropped the ball a little bit here. So let me pull this up and on screen and give a quick walkthrough, I guess. Hold on just a second, please. So, as you see, there's a big draft watermark here. And I think the title kind of summarizes what this does fairly well. So we're basically, you see, is my screen visible? I'm not quite sure here.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, so I guess the key here is establishing those emergency orders as a duly adopted law through the assembly by the legislative process, which means an introduction from one meeting and then another with the public hearing and, public input. And I guess at that time, there's opportunity for amendments to the specific details of the orders, which are going to become ordinance by this. And then at the same time, revoking and replacing those orders, which this ordinance is going to, convert. And then they're setting some parameters on future actions related to COVID-19. And I will get to that a little later. So the whereas paragraphs, some of them look familiar. The first one is boilerplate from what we have in all our extensions of the emergency proclamation. And this second talks about continuance issuance of emergency orders to address it. This part gets to why we thought that this was a good idea. We have the mayor's emergency powers, have the mayor having the emergency powers of a peace officer and so forth. And then the root key here is in the charter, we have a definition of emergency, which is an unforeseen circumstance, unforeseen occurrence or condition, which results or apparently will result. And I guess the key word here that sort of is the catalyst for this project is COVID-19 isn't very much unforeseen anymore. We've foreseen it for the past months and months. And so when you look at that definition, it's not really unforeseen. We think that that sort of raises some questions about how an emergency can be ongoing for 10 months. And so this is why this whole action makes a lot of sense, and to have a legislative process. We have time to do it. We can foresee what COVID-19 is doing with all the models and the data we have and all the responses that we've seen, not in our jurisdiction only in the state, but across the nation. So anyways, we also have some of the whereas paragraphs that kind of segue. So section 1 here also sort of outlines why this is here the public health emergency, and that the presence of COVID-19 has become generally known, foreseeable, and anticipated. Our ability of courses of action are equally predictable. So why don't we have a legislative process if all these are, if this is the situation and this is the circumstance, the purpose of having, I guess, that's, let me see. While I'm talking, I'm looking for the language where it mentions the the need for the emergency orders are to quickly respond to. But I'm sorry, I'm forgetting exactly where that is. I guess it's literally, I don't know. Because of these circumstances, there's sufficient time for the deliberative process to determine how to manage it. And by managing it, we mean all of those limitations, restrictions on gatherings, operational criteria, implementing the guidelines from the CDC that the Assembly and mayor have chosen to implement. So here we have section 2 masking distancing. And this is pretty much just taking the language of emergency order 13 version 3, it's the latest version of the mask emergency order, and putting it here into ordinance. So a lot of this doesn't change what's there. So maybe it will change after this is introduced and Assembly members get feedback and we have the public hearing, and then you will see where through our legislative process that you want to do something different here, from the wisdom of the full body rather than the unilateral action of the mayor. But it is using the mayor's emergency orders and pretty much exactly what they say as the jumping off point. And so that's section 2 for the masking requirements from EU 13 version 3. Business operations are also from the emergency ordinances, the attachments. And these attachments portions are highlighted because we're not quite finished updating that part of the attachments. And you won't see attachments in this email distribution. So, but the attachments are going to be the same as the operational guidance that the mayor's office issued, accompanying those emergency orders for those specific types of businesses and their operations. So that's, like I mentioned, pretty much exactly what the emergency ordinance says in that context. This part of travel is pretty much almost identical to what the travel restrictions are for those that the state has established for travel restrictions, and in that mayor's emergency orders had not really altered those, if I remember correctly. But we do have here the ability to make some alterations as to travel for within or people arriving to our municipal jurisdiction by this section 4. but again, it's not at this point doing anything different. And then again, the alcohol marijuana sales is exactly like the emergency order that allows curbside delivery, curbside service and delivery of alcohol and marijuana. So it's not doing anything differently from the existing emergency order. Same thing with the single-use public bags, single-use plastic bags, excuse me. And here we have some additional findings of the Assembly in a couple of whereas paragraphs about why this is needed. There's also a slight change here that enforcement may resume. So there's, I guess, because of these whereas paragraphs, some general notion that, well, the initial reason for and concerns and worries about the coronavirus being spread by reusable bags, maybe not as much of a concern as originally thought. So that's what these whereas paragraphs try to sort of initiate. And that's why it gives that ability to now return to the plastic bag ban at a certain date. So enforcement will resume by a state, and that's what we have here. So that's the general direction we thought in drafting this, that this would go, at least in terms of that one. So this is the one that's different in terms of not being exactly like the emergency order related to that subject. So here's where we get into more substantive parts about converting from mayor's orders to an ordinance, and then and then putting some limitations on what the mayor can do under this ordinance. So the emergency authority in charter still exists, but we have our civil emergency chapter 380, which lays it out. So this ordinance would override what 380 allows the mayor can do, and instead put some limitations here. And the limitations are very reasonable. So there's a lot of provisions in chapter 380. So if you recall, in March, we added the definition of public health emergency to chapter 380 in a whole new section, 380-65, that, you know, was based on state statute, but basically authorizes, you know, the municipal officials to require quarantining and isolation of persons infected, require testing and monitoring, everything that we need to do, that we have been doing for contact tracing and related to trying to contain the virus spread by identifying people infected and so forth. That's all in 380-65. But we have in 380 all these other provisions that have existed since unification in the 70s. And you might remember Stefossi talking about this way back when, where these provisions, you know, are mostly oriented towards situations where there might be some riots, you know, and calamity. A lot of what we've seen this past summer across the United States, you know, that's what those emergency provisions were originally drafted, with those riot situations in mind, or some calamity, tornado, earthquakes, where you might need to ration or gasoline or close gun sales and so forth, or impose a curfew, so, you know, people stay home, don't be out there in the streets rioting, we're going to be arrested. So all of these really have very little relevance to the COVID-19 situation. Now maybe we'll have some big riot occur. It's sort of like people are protesting about what's going on with the government and its reaction to COVID-19. Well, that's a different emergency. It's a riot. You know, although the riot's because of this issue, it's not a COVID-19 response. It's a riot response. So this is limited to orders due to COVID-19. That doesn't limit the mayor's authority for a riot, you know, that was started because people are mad about COVID-19. You know, that's not a virus spread. That's people being angry and that being contagious anger, I guess. So, and those powers of the mayor are not diminished here. These are only limiting for COVID-19, you know, being able to set a curfew, closing business establishments. And this one is probably where a lot of people will focus on. So not allowing the mayor's orders to close, order closure of businesses. So you know, the mayor has those 50% capacity limitations and so forth, but ordering absolute closure wouldn't be allowed by this. So I imagine this is going to be a controversial portion of this ordinance. And so here I mentioned firearms and so forth, you know, very little relevance to COVID-19. And then we have here that the mayor may still issue orders and take action under these subsections, 380, 60, D through H. And, you know, I'm sort of going into details. I don't want to take up too much more time than I'm supposed to. So please let me know if I should be a little more condensed at what I'm talking about, because right now I want to show you what D through H say, and because I don't want to quote it off the top of my head and get that wrong. So I'm pulling up the code for a second to tell you, you know, this ordinance doesn't limit the mayor in orders that would, under those subsections, which say designating, D is designating public property, streets and alleys, if they thoroughfares, sidewalks, so forth, close to motor vehicles, pedestrian traffic, except as required for physicians, nurses, responders, ambulance, utility, essential service, public, members of the news, media. So this allows closure of streets and public areas by the mayor. Can still do that. They're not closing private businesses, but can still close anything in publicly owned areas. Under D, so under E is calling up regular or auxiliary law enforcement agencies and organizations if needed, so that the authority wouldn't be affected. And subsection F is making use of all available resources of the municipal government, including municipal personnel, as may be reasonably necessary to cope with the emergency. So transferring the functions of departments, agencies, or personnel for the purpose of performing or facilitating performance of emergency services. So subsection F is really important because that authorizes the mayor to do things that would not otherwise be allowed under collective bargaining agreements, you know, shifting municipal employees from what they're assigned to do and, you know, their time and other restrictions by collective bargaining agreements, since it would allow the mayor to at least shift them to their assignments, you know, because of the COVID-19 emergency. And that seems like a very important thing and ability for the mayor to have as we see staffing issues arise at testing sites and so forth. And subsection G is about evacuating persons from a designated area. So suppose there's, you know, outbreak in a specific building or so forth, the mayor could still order evacuation. Subsection H is the boilerplate issue such other orders or regulations immediately necessary for the protection of life or property and property. And so the preservation of the mayor's ability to take actions under D through H are important, and it does have that H umbrella authority, as long as that umbrella authority does not violate some of these other restrictions and limitations that are up here. So that section 7 is very important to look at carefully. And I had mentioned 365, and so this is still preserved, except it's limited to be consistent with and not exceed the restrictions and requirements of the rest of this ordinance. So again, sort of looking back at what's restricted here in section 7.1. And so the last part here in 7 is terminating all those EOs that were in sections 2 through 6, you know, that are just being transferred to ordinance form. And so it doesn't terminate the emergency proclamation for COVID-19. So the mayor still has those powers under the emergency proclamation to do additional things. It's just terminating the emergency orders because we're putting them in ordinance form. You have time to do that through the legislative process, right? It does well, I'm sorry. So section 8 here does make it clear that nothing here limits the mayor's other general executive powers or authority to proclaim an emergency for some other reason, you know, not COVID-19, but like I mentioned, there's a riot. Maybe people are angry about COVID-19. That's a different emergency. So the mayor can issue whatever orders without limitation. I mean, not absolutely without limitation, but the limitations that are already in 380. And so that just preserves that. If there's another earthquake, you know, God forbid, or some other thing that happens, the mayor's emergency powers are still in place. And then here is enforcement. And what we have here is making sure that this ordinance doesn't allow people to sue each other. You know, don't have neighbors harassing neighbors for compliance, you know, and trying to bring some enforcement against them. But it still does have a municipal enforcement here. And this paragraph 2 for enforcement, this is basically that's the same sort of enforcement mechanism that was in the emergency proclamation and that the municipal attorney has described at various times over the last several months. So our intent is not for enforcement to be any different. So it still invokes enforcing under Section 830.015, which is a misdemeanor if there's some serious violation of these emergency orders which are becoming ordinance, or the civil violations which are under our municipal code of 145.10b, which is a civil violation. It allows for a fine $50 to $1,000, and for each different day to be a separate violation. And 15.20.20, which is public nuisances. And that was also in the an amendment to Chapter 380 that added 15.20.20 for the enforcement mechanisms for the measures of emergency orders. And so this just allows the same sort of enforcement mechanisms. And there we are at the end. And as I mentioned, there will be a number of attachments, which are basically the same attachments for operational guidance and requirements for various types of businesses, gyms and restaurants, public-facing operations, and so forth. And I guess that brings us to the end, and if there's some questions or so forth. But again, this is just our first peek at this draft. And I guess we can expect to see this evolve going forward, and probably, I would imagine, somebody's going to ask for a work session.
Thanks, Dean. Dennis Wheeler has also joined us. Dennis, did you want to add anything before we go into the discussion?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, but no, Dean covered it very well. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So I am first in the queue. So thanks, Dean, for going through that. Obviously, there's a lot of details that all of us are going to have to read more thoroughly, but just wanted to reiterate, and I think this can't be reiterated enough, that this is the first time that anyone has taken a look at this draft ordinance. This likely won't be on any agenda for a while, so there's likely going to be a lot of discussions about this before it gets added onto the agenda. But a question I had for you, Dean, and really it's more of a request. So I think it would be helpful for the public and for the assembly if you could do a crosswalk so that we could get a better understanding of what's included and what isn't included. I know there's that one provision of municipal code that you walked us through, D through H, but if there's a way to put that out in a more visual way so that assembly members can really look at what's still going to be in emergency order, what's going to be in Anchorage ordinance, that would be helpful. Thanks. That's it for me.
So if I may respond.
Yeah, go ahead, Dean.
Yes, and I get what you're saying. It would be helpful for the public to have more a summary that's more easily to read and understand. I think though crosswalk, what we've used that for in the past is so current code, and then what's being changed by the ordinance, what that effect would be. I'm not quite certain how well that could apply here, but my first thought when you were making that request, Mr. Chair, is that we don't have an assembly memorandum accompanying this yet. I think the assembly memorandum might be a good place to like really summarize with bullet points exactly what's happening and maybe the D through H powers that would be affected, describing them therein. So would an AM, be adequate for what you're asking for, or do you still think a crosswalk? Or you can give me more instruction later.
Thanks, Dean. No, I like the idea of the AM as long as it's very clear what's in what bucket. I think that makes sense. Thanks, Dean.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to move on in our queue to Meg.
Thanks, Felix. So I have a couple of requests as we move through this. One is I would definitely like some kind of analysis of how quickly the AO could change and the minimum time if we needed to change a provision of the AO. I think it's probably almost a month, but that would be really helpful when we work through our first work session. The other piece is, and I think we had requested this previously, and I realize things have been busy, is some kind of analysis of the premise of this AO is that there's no longer a defined emergency. So there are some things here that I guess I need to know in terms of like a legal analysis. Are we able to, or do we have a compelling enough government interest to do some of these things through ordinance versus it being under an emergency declaration? Like, is there a tangible difference to those things, particularly when it comes to masking and some of the other changes that are being made in response to COVID-19? And then the last request I would have, since I'm just putting them all out there and knowing that it might be a while till we get them, is what, if anything, needs to remain related to COVID-19 under the emergency declaration and within the powers of the mayor's office, either due to separation of powers issues or because of flexibility of being able to move maybe more swiftly than what we can do in amending an AO. And I guess those requests go both to Assembly Council, Mr. Wheeler, and Ms. Vogel, because I have the feeling there may be differing opinions, but I really need kind of that fulsome view before I can even start to get my head around the draft. Thanks.
I think I'd like to just respond to the first part for the moment. I think, compelling government interest is there. Obviously, we have the public's health, safety, and welfare, and COVID-19 clearly poses a risk. I mean, we have what number of deaths and so forth, and maybe whereas paragraph here about that the number of infections and deaths and hospitalizations and so forth. The compelling interest is we're protecting people here until we have, vaccinations and so forth. So for the other parts you mentioned, I mean, I think I would just point to, oh, I'm sorry, how fast this could change. Since it's an ordinance and not an emergency ordinance, right, where you can introduce and pass at the same meeting, an ordinance that you introduce at one meeting, and then it needs to be published, and after publishing it, the public hearing has to be scheduled at least 7 days after. So that gives opportunity for a special meeting. Some people might hate me for mentioning that, but that's the fact. You could have a special meeting 7 days after it's published, or actually the 8th day. So as terms of how fast, the fastest you could do that, you need a little time to draft and put it out there on the agenda for introduction. And, typically well, with an ordinance, you can lay it on the table if the second and third to introduce, that's the assembly members' rights under the charter. But we typically ask for the regular agenda introduction 10 days before. So if we're going on the fast track, you could get it drafted, which could take, I guess, a few days if we're in a rush, and introduce and have a public hearing at a special meeting and pass 8 days after that. So if you're on a real fast tracked timeline here, the fastest you could do this is, 10, 11, 12 days. But if we're on a more regular timeline, introduce, get it drafted, give us a few days for that. 10 days on regular agenda to introduce in the next regular meeting 2 weeks out. So yeah, somebody mentioned almost a month, and that sounds about right. In terms of starting the draft to getting it passed. And then I guess you mentioned the effect on the mayor's powers and so forth. And that's where these things come into play, as I mentioned under Section 7. And maybe there will be, no, not maybe, I'm sure there will definitely be different perspectives of what this would say and how it would work. So I invite, as you had asked, Ms. Donatello, Mr. Wheeler or Ms. Vogel to chime in if they want to.
This is Kate Vogel. So I haven't seen the draft before today, and I haven't reviewed it, so I'm not prepared to offer a sort of bigger opinion, although, yeah, I anticipate there's some difference of opinions, and I do have some legal concerns with small parts of it. And then obviously there's sort of some very big policy decisions that are being embedded here. Yeah, I don't think I'm prepared today to have more in-depth comments on the specific draft.
Thanks. And, I think for a lot of the questions that members are probably going to ask, we're probably not going to be ready to have detailed responses to those. So I'm okay with if folks have brief, quick responses to questions. Otherwise, I will be sending out an email with requests for questions so that we can compile all of those requests, send them to the administration and to Assembly Council so that we can get answers on all of those requests. Thanks, Meg. John?
Thanks. This does what it obviously does. I've also, as I've been thinking about this, kind of looked at something that could be in addition to this. And that would be, kind of with the backdrop that, we should expect pandemics again in the future. And I'm sure we've all been reading about it. Pandemics are becoming more common. I didn't see them in my lifetime till now, and now more coming up, and we should expect more, and we should plan on it. And having somewhere in our code, when do you call? When do you notice something as a pandemic that is a health crisis that needs to be reacted to? What triggers that? And then at the other end is, when do we say we're done? What happens when we just say, okay, we're hands off? Either it's all done, there's vaccine, it's not a worry, or maybe it's even, it's everybody's got it and there's nothing left we can do. I don't know. And of course, there's a lot in between too. So that's something that's not in here, but it's something that I'm trying to read up on and learn more about, and just think about that. So in the future, there's probably less, oh my goodness, what do we do? You go, oh, here it is. Here's our rules. And I expect the EOC has some stuff like that, that already does that. So that's the place I'll be heading next. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Forrest?
Yeah, I have two broad sort of conceptual thoughts. The first is going off of what John just said, which is, I think making an ordinance that's specifically about COVID-19 is probably not appropriate. That is to say, it should be about something like, respiratory disease or pandemic, or something about influenza type pandemics. I'm sure we could find the appropriate language, but we generally don't put code into effect with this level of specificity. So I would like to see something that's a little bit more generally applicable. And I realize that's difficult, but that's kind of what the code is for, as opposed to the appropriate role of emergency orders. And that goes to my second point, which I think this was and there's obviously been a lot of work done on this, but I think it's kind of gone down a different path than I was expecting, which is to say, I thought this was going to be a collaborative process with the administration to try to move things from EO to AOs that could be done effectively, that gave the public comfort that the administration was not acting outside the bounds of the law or was not acting in concert with the assembly. If the assembly wants to limit the actions of the administration, we can just repeal EOs. We can already do that. We don't need to use an ordinance to do that. So I don't believe any of the EOs that the administration has put forward yet have violated the charter or violated the code or violated state law. If I thought that, or if any of us thought that, then we should repeal it, repeal the EOs, which is within our power. So I'm hoping, I guess, between now and when the next time we see this draft, that the people who are leading this effort sit down with the administration and really make sure that they are part of this discussion, that Ms. Vogel and her team and the health department and their team are all intimately involved in crafting this, so that we can create something that won't have to get vetoed or won't violate separation of powers, and frankly shows that we are collaborating with them and not in opposition to them. Because like I said, we already have the power to reverse their actions should we so choose. So yeah, I'm not going to vote for something unless I know that the administration has been sort of intimately involved in its construction in this case because of the unique relationship between an ordinance like this and the emergency powers. Thank you.
Thanks. John?
So if I could respond, Mr. Chair.
I'd actually,
Felix, that'd be fine.
Dean, I'd like John to go, and then you can go, Dean.
Okay.
So go ahead,
You know,
John.
I agree with Forrest.
Sure.
I agree with Forrest. I mean, we just got this, and the administration's seen it, and I don't certainly on my part, role in it, have any intent to start a big battle. I think let's see what it looks like on paper. Do we leave it all in there? Do we pull some out? Or as you say, Forrest, just broaden it to the broader picture instead of something so specific. And as it's presented here too, my understanding is nothing really revoked. You know, it just takes the existing mandates and puts them into code form. So it doesn't go quite that far as I've seen it. And I looked at it just half an hour or so before the meeting. But so I agree with Forrest. Thanks.
Thanks. Dean?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. Mr. Dunbar has some great thoughts and points. I just wanted to clarify one thing, the distinction here between, well, two things. Right, this is not codifying anything. So it is COVID-19 specific, and because of that, I don't think it was a good idea to codify that either. So this is a non-codified ordinance, and because it's not in code, I think it's okay to have it specific to the situation. So when it's all done and we're all immune, we have vaccinations and so forth, we just have an AU that says we repeal this ordinance, you know, or so forth. Very simple to do at that point. And then that second point of clarification is Mr. Dunbar is correct that the Assembly already has the power to reverse emergency orders that the mayor, the administration has issued. However, that Assembly ability is limited to only terminating the whole emergency order. And, you know, I have this debate with the municipal attorney early on back in March and April, where we had our first sets of emergency orders. And at that point, you know, there were some, I think, ideas to change just certain sentences or portions of an emergency order. And in talking to the municipal attorney, you know, I can see they didn't agree that our code allows the Assembly to only terminate an order and not, you know, to go in and start editing, you know, portions of the order piecemeal. So the Assembly's ability, to reverse what emergency orders have been issued is there right now, but what's not there is to edit it and amend it piecemeal. And that's what this ordinance actually would enable the Assembly to do. So you have the public involvement and you hear from your constituents, and you do your own, I guess, research as to what's out there, what you think is effective. Maybe that differs slightly from the administration in some respects, and then you could amend what's here in this ordinance now is pretty much identical to the emergency orders, but here you have the ability to edit specific provisions of those where you don't have that ability if you stay in the current regime, which we have emergency orders and we can terminate them or not. That's all. So I think that's a big distinction that I wanted to clarify.
Thanks, Dean. Forrest?
Yeah, I just wanted to say to Dean that I appreciate those comments. I think they're both very well taken, and it's an ongoing policy discussion we've had since the beginning of the pandemic. So remind me then, if this is an emergency ordinance, it's not non-codified, is it 60 days until it expires or some other date? And if it is 60 days, I'm a little worried that we'll get into a similar situation where we're extending it just like the EOs are being extended. And that if we don't, there'll be a perception in the public that when it expires, so too does the mayor's emergency powers, which would not be the case, I don't believe. And the last thing I'll say is the reason I think I prefer, and I think Mr. Weddleton prefers something that's a little more generally applicable, is because there's a sense of fairness for the public if you have a series of sort of tripwires that says, like, when this happens, then this goes into effect, which was what we did with the bag ban. It's like, so long as emergency declaration is in effect, the bag ban is suspended. And so if you can say, so long as these kind of things exist, then these measures are in effect. But I realize that is harder, and perhaps we can't get there. But I'll say the last point I'll make is I sort of interpret this rule, and this is not how it's written right now, but this is the kind of ordinance I think I could support, would be safety regulations from the state, where we can be more strict but not less strict. And in the same way, I think the mayor will have the power to be more strict but not less strict. We're going to create tripwires that say automatically, if we have this kind of pandemic, then these restrictions go into place. But I think it would be a violation of the separation of powers, and perhaps not, but I think it would be a violation of separation of powers to say that the inherent emergency powers of the mayor don't prevent additional actions if they think that's necessary because of a worsening public health crisis. And for that reason, I'm not sure that I don't know if that is actually something that the Assembly could do. That is prevent closures of business, saying that the mayor lacks that power. I'm just not sure if that, to me, that seems like a violation of the separation of powers, but it's a conversation that we will continue to have. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, is there any further discussion before we move on? Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. So let's go ahead and move on to our next topic under other items, COVID-19, very general topic. So it's been a while since we've had an open discussion about any issues which have come up regarding COVID-19 that folks want the Assembly to engage in, either through committee process, work sessions, other forums. So I figured I'd make some space during today's meeting so we can talk about the issue, talk about any issues members want to bring forward for consideration. I have two things to kick this off if folks want to mull this over a little bit. So first is the idea of a special a Make It Monday forum with the Anchorage Chamber, except for it would be a special Make It Tuesday forum. So earlier today, I talked with Bruce Bustamante, who is the head of the Anchorage Chamber of Commerce, and he has agreed to host the Assembly to talk with his members, the members of the chamber, and have a dialogue about business issues and the economy. And so that's something that John and I have been mulling over and trying to reach out to the chamber to engage them. So excited to move forward with Bruce on that, and I'll keep the assembly informed on dates and everything for the possibility for that. So that was just a quick report one. Second item I wanted to bring forward is about the ASD and MOA. So the Assembly and Anchorage School Board have received a variety of resolutions from community councils asking us to work together to forge a path to reopening schools in January. From what I understand, the Anchorage School Board is going to be taking up a resolution urging the Assembly and Municipal Administration to take appropriate measures and work in collaboration with the school district so schools can reopen in January. So just sort of an open question on that. Is the Assembly interested in engaging in this topic, and how would you all want to? I know we had a health policy committee meeting between the two bodies. Is that the way that you all want to continue engaging in this if there's interest? That's an open topic. Okay, with that, I'm just going to go in the queue. If anyone wants to address the topics I brought up or bring up additional ones, feel free to. So, John.
Okay, I had a separate topic, but my gut feeling and my hope is that we leave opening schools up to the school district and the school board. I know people want us to weigh in, but I think we don't have anywhere near the expertise that they have. One thing that I'm struggling with as a business owner is what are the quarantine rules? And they're very different, and they're coming from all official sources, and they're contradictory. You know, CDC has their routine. Well, you have to get tested twice and get 2 negatives, and you know, and the tests are 24 hours apart. Okay. And if you get 2 negatives, then you're good to go. And we have something that has logos from the health department and Native Tribal Health Consortium in the state of Alaska on it. And it talks about if you get a positive test that, you know, you quarantine, you know, until you have no symptoms, and then you're pretty much, and I think a few days after that, and then you're good to go. And if you get a negative test, it basically says you're good to go. 1 negative test. And then there's something posted on, I think, our website I just read today that says even if you get a negative test, 14 days quarantine. And all of those are vastly different. And particularly if you're running a business, I mean, actually the 14 days, if you are exposed to someone who's positive, they say no matter what you get a negative test or not, you should quarantine for 14 days. So with that variety, it's very hard to know as a business, what do you do? And that is, you know, do you shut down because you have half your staff got exposed to someone and now they're all out for 2 weeks? Is that really necessary? And if it is, then you do it. But other guidance, you know, if you do the CDC 2-test routine, you know, 3 or 4 days, you could have 2 negative tests and they're back to work. So I don't even know where to go with that, because the same sources have contradictory information. So thanks.
Thanks. Good point, John. Jamie?
Thank you. And I appreciate your statements, John. That's kind of where I was going along the lines. Out here in Eagle River, we have quite a few businesses that have been calling me and are very concerned. One of them was about the ADA, about the Americans Disability Act. So they're trying to figure out, okay, do we allow people in here who don't have a mask on because for whatever reason they don't have to because of their disability? And then they were questioning the term, what is defined by, and maybe Dean, I don't know, just take note that what is defined when the businesses are compelled, because the definition of the word compelled, as businesses have been stating to me, is physically removing or pushing out. And so there's a physical aspect to that word, but there's also encouraging too. So at what point do the businesses have to state, get out of my building, or if they don't want them to, or if they're saying, I need to respect the ADA laws, and are they going to be, because I have a feeling it's going to come down, there's going to be a lot of lawsuits come forward or complaints through the Human Rights Commission of Alaska. And then the other concern I was having was schools as well. So the schools are the experts, the ASD is the expert, and the unions, teachers unions over there are the experts. And I find that the assembly meddling in the school district's business, and obviously when someone gets on their bully pulpit, which I encourage elected officials to do, if they're trying to get word out to the community of issues. But the teachers union, AEA, is definitely using their bully pulpit for the assembly members to force a hand on something, which I think that is their lane. I wouldn't do that to the state legislators. I wouldn't do that to the governor. And I would definitely wouldn't do that to the ASD. And I would hope that the state representatives would stay out of our lane as public officials of what we're doing as elected officials, maybe behind the scenes, give us advice or help guide us in certain ways that they are hearing from their community, but absolutely in no way make decisions hard, fast on what we think is right for them and then overrule it and push it and have it happen. So I do have concerns about that. My other thing, Felix, is I think this is what the Anchorage Chamber of Commerce is a great idea. And I'm wondering, we have a Chamber of Commerce out here in Eagle River, and I would like to afford the opportunity for all assembly members, and I'm sure I can arrange something with my community and my Eagle River Chamber of Commerce and our business owners to try to get to know these assembly members as well, to find out where you guys are truly coming from, where you're standing, and perspective, so that my community sees the overall of what's happening as well. So maybe that's something we could venture in, and I would be more than happy to provide that information for you and see if we can get that on board. The other thing I wanted to bring up, just to kind of give everybody a heads up, is that I have been inundated with phone calls and fielding phone calls about people, like John had said, that it's kind of a little bit confusing with the whole mandates. But one of the things that people are very confused about, and maybe we could address this, is that when you are tested positive and then you are then negative and then you're not technically contagious, I don't know all the waking details, I'll figure it all out. But why are people who are no longer contagious and who've already tested positive wearing masks? Why would they have to be enforced to wear masks? So before I come forward with an AO or some sort of offer to the assembly and the administration to think about that, I just wanted to bring that up so that we could put that out there, kind of mull over it, do a little bit of research, and then maybe next time we get together, we can discuss it in a work session or somewhere else, whatever we have to do. That's it. Thank you, Felix, for allowing me to speak up.
Thanks, Jamie. And yeah, absolutely. If you want to organize something with the Eagle River Chamber of Commerce, I'm sure plenty of folks would enjoy the opportunity to talk with the Eagle River businesses. Same thing, we forget sometimes about Girdwood. So John, if you want to talk to the Girdwood folks, happy to sit down with them as well. I know it's 3 different separate domains. Okay. Moving
one
on to
happy
Meg.
family.
Good point. Meg?
Thanks. Starting with your initial statement regarding the school board and the request for collaboration, we do have Health Policy Committee on Wednesday, December 2nd, and Susanna and I have been working on that agenda, and there is space. So we would be happy to host a joint conversation. While I appreciate the comments about everyone staying in their lane, I think it is, we need to recognize that the school exists within the municipality and it is a large employer. And I actually think of it as a dually large employer because kids' jobs are to go to school. And so what it does is not without effects on our community. And I think it's really helpful to have both the health department and school district administration and both bodies together to talk through this. I think we get greater understanding of where everyone's coming from. So that invitation is there. We can certainly do that if that work session format, or not work session, but the committee format works. We would only have an hour, or we could try to start a half an hour earlier. Thanks.
Thanks, Meg. Kate.
Thanks, Felix. I just wanted to offer that we're happy to address common questions to the EOs within our FAQs. So if you're getting repeated ones from your constituents about, how does this interact with the ADA, for example, we do have some FAQs that already discuss that in greater detail than we're able to go into in the EO. But if there are questions that you're hearing that we're not answering, we'd love to be helpful to you in that way.
Thanks, Kate. All right. Any other discussion? Again, this is just open discussion. Any COVID-19 issues you guys are hearing about or want discussed in other forums? Meg?
Thanks. I'm just going to plug the CARES Act surveys. They're COVID-19 related. They are up on our CARES Act page. I've been mentioning them at all community councils. If you all can keep mentioning them, if we can get individuals and small businesses to fill them out and give feedback on their experience with trying to access CARES Act funds related to the municipality, the feedback has been really great we've gotten, but we could definitely use more responses. The response rate is kind of low, and I think the more data we have moving forward will make us more responsive and agile if we have additional monies to appropriate. Thanks.
Thanks, Meg. All right. So not seeing anyone else in the queue, we'll go ahead and move on. There's nothing under unfinished business, so we'll move on to audience participation. Let me just pull up our participants. I think we have a few folks here from the public. Would anyone like to participate? You'll have 3 minutes to address the committee. If you're on the phone,
hello?
I
Hello?
believe it's, yeah, go ahead, Mr. Haberman.
Yeah, welcome. I'll start my timer. My name is Eugene Carl Haberman. I follow the public process. When the public process is done appropriately, a decision made by the governing body is more like in public interest. First thing I need to say is this. The critical item you discussed today, dealing with a proposed ordinance, of all things dealing with, instead of emergency powers, you've got a draft there. You had a conversation, and there was nothing on the website under the Rules Committee for the public to see that item and have that conversation with that paperwork before, and the public being blind to what the words were is not the way to go. It certainly would not give comfort to the public with having that distance from you discussing that item and the public. So this needs to be corrected. Second is this. You've heard my words about, those who are questioning masks are confusing freedom with responsibility. But I'd like to address one critical history and reminder of this COVID scenario. Many, many months ago, the public was told nationally not to wear masks because we need to provide them to the medical providers. Also, testing was very limited and who could be tested. Well, that's changed. People can get masks and people can get tested. Although there's long lines nationally for people to be getting tested, there's still those things that were not done. So those numbers are changing. But I would like to also remind you this. When the city of Anchorage and others moved in the direction of essential businesses open and others closed, that created a situation, respectfully, where there were few places for the public to be going, resulting in places like Target, Walmart, and others concentrated with huge numbers of people. And that's not the way to go. It increases the infection to many people because those limited number of places being open. So I plead with administration in the city not to go back to the policy of essential businesses open, because it ruins the economy and it also does not deal effectively dealing with COVID and its spreading. The second thing I'd like to address is this. Remind you that the reward that when you go to essential business, which I have not announced, but I fear that might be where you're thinking that's the only thing you can do, you leave an economy that basically is on the road to ruin. I know, and I recognize the need for the health and welfare of everyone in the state and the country. But it's proven the wrong direction for the city, and it's proven the wrong direction for the country. So I'll leave you with that, and also this, remind you in closing that there are 100,000 people to your neighbor in the Valley. And there's a
Mr.
rational
Haberman,
responsibility
your time is up.
dealing with a mask, and you need to deal with them and recognize they need to be a partner to this situation to help
Thank you, Mr. Haberman.
Thank you very much.
I believe I was muted, but my name is Dean Canna. I'd like to make some public remarks.
Yes, go ahead, sir, if you could introduce yourself. You have 3 minutes.
Sure. My name is Dean Cannon. I'd like to address belittling remarks made of me in my absence by Felix Rivera, chair of the Anchorage Assembly, at a regular assembly meeting on 17 November 2020. He insinuated I lacked basic human decency. My testimony referred to public comments made by our acting mayor, Austin Quinn Davidson, a public figure. Her comments were that Anchorage is mostly a progressive city. I disputed that assertion and provided testimony about my reservations about the progressive ideology, about places where that ideology is prevalent, that the ideology's chief concern is the accumulation and concentration of power, not necessarily the well-being of all its citizens. It's a well-founded concern. It's topical. At least half the country is talking about it right now. I did not single out any individuals for attack. During and after my testimony, I asked that if anybody had any questions, they could address me. After answering one, I waited right there in the seats, and there were no more. I learned publicly via social media that Chair Rivera singled out my testimony at the conclusion of the meeting. He publicly identified me as this individual in an attempt to shame me. He did this after I left, and I was not able to defend myself. Again, he mentioned basic human decency, but his belittling comments have left me open to public shame. The chair inadvertently justifies my concerns, namely that the ideology encourages attacks from behind. I think it is outrageous that a public figure can belittle remarks made by a citizen in a public setting and face no repercussions. This wasn't a public debate. This was a routine meeting. If the chair has such contempt for what the public are thinking, how can that person or anyone be trusted to affect the public's will? I conclude my remarks. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? All right, not hearing anyone else. I will go ahead and adjourn this meeting, and I'll see folks again at 1:10. Thanks, everyone.